Hello and welcome to Hysteria. I'm Erin Ryan.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco.
Alyssa, I know it's early in the day, but I've got something off color to say.
Okay.
You know, all these kind of Silicon Valley libertarian bros suddenly wanting bailouts and support from the government. It kind of reminds me of like a guy who really hates wearing condoms being like, why'd I get herpes? It's like, come on, like you wanted this. You asked for that. You put yourself in this position. It's true. They are no condoms guys who are like, it's so unfair that I got chlamydia. It's like, of course you're going to get chlamydia. You're fucking without a condom on. You're raw dogging, idiot.
They're also the guys who are like, you guys stop being so hysterical. Ro's always going to be fine.
Yeah, fucking they're idiots. They're wrong about almost everything, and then they just get bailed out whenever they're wrong, and it like doesn't register. It like just
wrong
slides
bitches
off their brains. Anyway, all right, Alyssa, let's get to some news before we get to our interview, which I'm really excited about. We got to talk about this. As we're recording this right now, a federal judge in Texas is holding a hearing in a lawsuit that seeks to overturn the Food and Drug Administration's approval of one of two kinds of pills that are used in medication abortions. The judge is named Judge Kacsmaryk, and he is a judge in the Northern District of Texas. He's been Streisanding himself a little bit, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this guy's a Trump appointee, and he has spoken out against abortion and against bodily autonomy. Yeah, hates Roe v. Wade. This guy is kind of he's in the tank for anti-choice people. The medication at the center of the case has been prescribed for more than 20 years successfully and safely to people who are looking to terminate pregnancies, but none of that matters. On Friday, Judge Kacsmaryk called the lawyers in and said that he wanted the hearing on Wednesday morning to be like super secret. He asked the lawyers not to disclose that information about when the hearing was, and he said he wouldn't enter it into the public court record until late Tuesday evening.
Erin, you've been having some witchy moments about this. Do you have a prediction for why he's being this way?
I think it's because he can't take the heat. We know what he's going to do. He's telegraphing what he's going to do, which is probably either outlaw or severely restrict access to a type of medication that has been demonstrably safe in terminating pregnancies for the 20 years that it's had FDA approval. It is a bullshit lawsuit, but bullshit doesn't matter to these people. It doesn't matter because they have the power. So bullshit they don't need to prove to anybody because they're the ones with unchecked power. So here's the thing about that. So abortion providers have confirmed to reporters at Jezebel that if the judge bans mifepristone, which is one of the two drugs that we mentioned, they're able to prescribe misoprostol-only abortions as a workaround. So the medication abortion with both types of medication is slightly more effective than just with the one. But here's the thing about misoprostol. Misoprostol is used for a lot of different things. It's a pretty common medication, and it would be really difficult for any judge to make that drug illegal. Now, of course, I do not put it past anybody on the anti-abortion side to try their hardest, to try to make it illegal to prescribe it to pregnant people, to try to make it illegal to prescribe it to women of a certain age. So I am not, that's like faint hope, but the reason that we're bringing it up is because if you are a person who is pregnant and you're looking to terminate your pregnancy, I think a lot of messaging is that abortion pills are going to be illegal across the country immediately. And it's true that this judge can make this kind of abortion pill illegal immediately across the country. It doesn't matter where you live. But he can't make every type of medication abortion illegal. Not right now, not with this lawsuit. So,
And it is also worth noting that misoprostol in other countries where they have been using it just on its own for abortion has been found to be 99% effective. The studies here are not as expansive, but Erin, they keep trying. And it's like, if you're so certain that you're right, do it out in the open. Why you close in your courtroom, you pussy little bitch?
Here's the thing. Judge Kacsmaryk is claiming that there have been death threats and he's worried about the safety of his staffers or whatever. But you know what, dude? How many pro-life, anti-choice people have been assassinated by pro-choice activists?
Yep.
I can't think of a single one. I cannot think of a single one. How many pro-choice activists, abortion providers, how many of those people have experienced bodily harm from the right wing? Like, it is so ridiculous for him to complain that, like, he thinks he's in danger. Like, come the fuck on, dude. You're just a pussy. You're just a fucking pussy.
Yeah, that's all
and
we
I
have
don't
to
mean
say
that,
about that.
And I don't mean that in a nice way, like a pussy, the Betty White way, like a pussy can I mean it. He is a wimp. He is a wimpy, fancy boy. And what he is about to do, if we're wrong, hey, that's great. That's great.
Terrific. Happy to be wrong. Happy to be wrong.
Good. I would love to be wrong about this. But if we're right, I think that any derision that doesn't include violence, but like peaceful protests, people taking it up with him publicly, people getting mad at him when they see him at a restaurant, all of those things he should fucking expect. You don't get to just take rights away from millions of people and not have there be any real impact on the way you live your life. Like, sorry, dude, people are going to protest you. I'm sorry, dude, people are going to be mad when they see you out in public. I'm sorry, but that's what you fucking get. You deserve it.
And this is, guess what? You reap what you sow. This is why you wanted to be a judge. You're doing what you wanted to do. So, I don't know. Enjoy yourself. You can't
be like, I'm going to fuck around secretly so nobody finds out. The find out is
right.
Like
coming. It's here.
It's coming. It's coming. It's here. But I think that maybe the silver lining of things like this, of cases like this, is in the aftermath of Roe being overturned, we are seeing a relentless parade of reminders of how far conservatives are willing to take this, how far they're willing to roll back rights of women, of anybody who can get pregnant. They will never be happy. They will never be happy until you are a broodmare. That's it. That's truly it. So, I'm glad that, kind of bleakly glad that this is keeping this in the headlines, because it's what's at stake for every single election. It's what's at stake. Every single election. Any vote for any Republican is a vote for a complete rollback of women's rights. And that's it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was real ranty. It was real.
You do your thing. You do your thing. You felt like ranting. You rant.
I've been fueled by Petty Brew coffee.
You're fueled by Petty Brew, and I'm just here sitting vigil for the polar bears. That's it.
We'll talk more about the polar bears next week. We're going to talk about the polar bears for the entirety of news next week. But for now, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have an interview you're not going to want to miss. And welcome back. Alyssa, you and I both know that we have lists of dream guests we're looking forward to, guests we want to have. And there have been people who have been on that list for ages. Today, our guest is one of those people. Our guest today is a self-proclaimed journalist type, an opinion haver who writes The Present Age, an award-winning newsletter about media, politics, and culture. She used to be the editor-at-large at Media Matters for America, heard of it, often writing about the way right-wing media twists the truth. Parker Molloy, welcome to Hysteria.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to finally be here.
I know. We've been like kind of doing that come on my podcast dance for a couple years. So
and it was like, soon. We'll figure it out. Yeah.
But we figured it out. We did it.
We did.
We did it. So let's get into it. Parker, more American adults are openly identifying as LGBTQ plus than ever before. Yet it seems like people are directing more and more hate towards queer and trans people with all this anti-trans legislation and propaganda. Why do you think queer people are both more visible and accepted and also more publicly targeted? Like, what do you make of this paradox?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I think what happened here is that after the marriage equality decisions in the Supreme Court, there was a big shift on the right in how they focused. All these groups that existed specifically to fight against like marriage equality had to kind of rethink their strategy, and they looked for an easier target. And for that target, they landed on trans people because that is an easier target because the message when it came to marriage was, everyone understands love. Love is love, and all those happy things. But when it comes to understanding trans people, if you're not trans, it's a lot harder to really get out there, and it's hard as a trans person, as I am, to explain what it's like to be trans. People, and in doing so, a lot of times people will kind of fall back on these kind of canned answers, born in the wrong body, or I have a woman's soul or brain, or all of these things that don't quite explain it, but try to convey the general message to people to help them understand like what's happening, like what is at odds. So in picking a fight with trans people and in targeting trans people, it's been a lot more effective, I think, for the right when they're doing this, because they can point to a trans person saying, I just want to use, if I need to use a public restroom, I would like to be able to do so without being hassled. And they can go, well, how do we know that some hulking man isn't going to go follow my little girl into the bathroom and attack her? Like those sorts of things, those sorts of very visceral, or like things that create a visceral response from people where they want to protect their kids and they want to do all that stuff, and it spills over. And when it comes to trans people, those of us who transition in adulthood, I transitioned when I was 26, and I'm 30 something now. But like that those of us who transition in adulthood, a lot of times we're kind of visibly trans, some more than others. Some people are tall, some are short. The voices. I'm kind of lucky in the sense that my voice is kind of just this weird androgynous nothingness thing that has kind of been the case for my entire life. But and I'm not super tall or anything, but it's easy to pick on trans people because a lot of us do kind of stand out. A lot of us are quote unquote visibly trans. And so that makes it a lot more difficult, I think, for us to kind of hide away if we want to. And they've been relentless with this. The right has been just piling it on. And I think a big part of it is this sort of idea that if they can separate LGB and T, Q, and so on, like if they can do that, then they'll be able to get their foot back in the door to go after things like marriage again, and go after, try to overturn Lawrence versus Texas to reinstate sodomy laws and stuff like that. It's all tied together. And the Family Research Council has gone on record a number of times and said that their goal is to try to separate, divide and conquer, and then go back to it. And that's why it's really important to try to kind of keep people from falling for a lot of misinformation and propaganda and, exaggerations,
Mm-hmm. Parker, anti-trans bills have really covered the gambit, everything from healthcare to drag shows. One, are there really egregious examples of legislation that you've seen that our listeners may not know about, that they should know about? And how have you seen these bills being introduced impact your community emotionally, tangibly, et cetera?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of bills that are, each of the past few years, there have been a lot of bills that have targeted trans people in various ways. Whether it's defining who can use public restrooms, who can without, being arrested or hassled along the way, or who can, work without getting fired for being trans and stuff like that. But the focus in the past couple of years, and the focus especially this year, has been on a lot of things related to they are really focusing on this save the children, protect the children kind of idea. And so with that, you have bills that ban trans kids from playing sports. You have bills that make it illegal for trans kids, and by kids I mean people in their mid to late teens making medical decisions, and all of those things. The end goal here is not about kids. It's not about, they definitely don't care about women's sports.
No,
that is just clear, but the goal is to make life as hard for trans people as possible. And I think you're seeing in some states like Tennessee is getting really aggressive with it. And I know that that's where the Daily Wire people have all kind of moved down to, and so it's kind of home base for transphobia these days, it seems like. But the goal is to make it as hard as possible for trans adults to exist as well. To make healthcare, transition related healthcare illegal, and it's scary, and it builds off of something that I think a lot of us could see kind of coming, is this idea that when Roe was overturned, you're gonna start seeing them try to get Republicans try to insert themselves into individual healthcare decisions all over the place, and that's why I think it's scary and it's frustrating when I see people who are very feel very strongly about abortion rights, but then not care about trans issues. Or I see a trans person who's very passionate about trans rights, but is like, I don't care about abortion. It's like these things are all sort of linked together, because I don't care if anyone personally, if someone's like, oh, I think Parker Molloy's a man. It's like, okay, I mean, I get dozens of those messages every day. I don't care about that stuff. I care about being able to sort of live my life and go through that. And that's why I'm just scared mostly about the legal stuff that's happening. The attempts to kind of paint trans people as weird, mentally ill people, which, hey, I'm weird and mentally ill, but that's separate. That's kind of their goal, to be able to insert themselves into our lives on this, and micromanage what we can do and who we can be. The one example of people like to talk about when they're talking about sports, they like to talk about Leah Thomas, the trans swimmer who was at Penn, who won a national championship in one of her swim races. People like to talk about that, but the one example that always comes to mind for me when I think about instances of trans people competing in sports, and it actually being something that is unfair, is the example of, there was this trans boy named Mac Beggs, he was in Texas, and so he's a trans boy. He wanted to wrestle against the boys, and he was taking testosterone, and so he was like, cool, I want to do this, and I want to wrestle in college, and I just want to wrestle boys. And the state of Texas was like, nope, you got to wrestle the girls or you can't wrestle at all. And so he's like put in this impossible position that someone who's like 16 should not have to find himself in, where he's like, okay, well, do I not compete in the sport that I want to do or not? And so he competes, and he dominates. It is in the movie Billy Madison, where Adam Sandler is playing dodgeball against kids.
Now you're all in big trouble.
That's kind of what his wrestling matches looked like, and it was unfair. He was taking testosterone. Dude was ripped, and he didn't want to wrestle against girls. He wanted to wrestle against the boys. And the state of Texas then, after this, they could have gone, okay, that clearly was a bad idea. We'll let him wrestle against the boys. No, they were like, okay, well, if he wants to keep wrestling, he needs to stop taking testosterone. And it's like, okay, well, you created a rule designed to keep things fair, which ended up creating wildly unfair conditions. And then when called on it, you were like, I guess we're going to have to just sort of change it in a different way to exclude this kid. And that's sort of the example that comes to mind that people ignore. It's like, all of these things, the decisions about who goes on what healthcare and who does what, who socially transitions or medically transitions, and when they do that, these aren't decisions that need to be made in state houses. These aren't decisions that need to be made by politicians. These are decisions that need to be made by trans people, by their doctors, and if you're talking about minors, with their parents. And that is what I think is getting lost in a lot of this, because we focus on things like, well, what if they have regret, and what if this, or what if that? But when it comes down to it, it's really this same sort of central issue of bodily autonomy that I think connects a lot of the fights right now in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting, an important way to frame it, I think. And I was also thinking a lot, as you were just talking, Parker, about how every year for the past several years, there seems to have been like a pet anti-trans issue. It's like they're just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like the bathroom bills thing people kind of hated those. And so they just kind of chose a different
Kept
tack.
going. Yeah.
And people hated that tack. And it's all kind of, it kind of is pathetic watching how many bad faith arguments they'll put forward in order to advance their agenda. But I think that part of the reason that these narratives are able to stick is because of the way that these issues are covered. So on that note, like, what do you make of journalistic coverage of anti-trans bills? Like, what publications are doing it well and which are doing a really bad job?
Sure. Well, I think one that's kind of gotten a lot of coverage lately is the New York Times. I mean, there was that letter that a bunch of Times contributors signed on to, and really, but they define Times contributor as anyone who has ever had anything written or anything published in the New York Times before. So I signed on to that letter. I didn't write it, but the New York Times has been really hyper focused on trans issues in a kind of strange way, because there's not been a whole lot that's changed about how trans kids can receive healthcare, or what the guidelines have changed. Like, that's been all pretty consistent. Like, it's changed a little bit here and there, but the New York Times over the past year especially has really focused in on this stuff and zeroed in. And it's kind of scary. It reminds me of, so one of the things that when trans people will push back on this, we'll hear is like, oh, you just don't want us to report. You don't want us to report what's happening in the world. You don't want us to report the news. But if you read these stories, very few of them are actually tied to specific news events, specific news pegs, other than Republicans want to make this illegal, so we're going to cover it in the paper, kind of thing. But what it's like is when we hear Republican politicians talk about late-term abortion, when they go partial birth abortion, late-term abortion, they talk about this all the time. And it's not that they just care about that. We all understand that when they're talking about, that they're actually trying to, they're like, we're against partial birth abortion, and that's why we need to ban abortion after 6 weeks. Those things where it's just like, oh, you're just totally skipping over it. You're showing your hand here.
Yeah.
And it's that same thing when it comes to trans issues, where it's all this focus on trans kids, where you have people making these arguments who have told the New York Times that their goal is adults too, to ban this for adults, but they are just starting with kids because they think that's where the quote unquote consensus is. And so it's really frustrating to kind of watch that play out and then hear all of these sort of meta debates with these pundits and these reporter dudes who like to kind of focus on this. It's become kind of their obsession. And it's very frustrating. As for outlets that are doing a better job on it, I mean, I think Rolling Stone has done a pretty good job covering this. I think Vice has done a pretty good job covering this, and I think it's important to give credit where credit's due. And the scary thing about the state of the media right now is you'll see a good article and then you'll see another story that's just Vice lays off 20% of staff, and you're like, oh God, I hope they didn't lay off, any of the writers who actually like showed that they cared about this issue and were focused on this issue. Those sorts of things are kind of scary, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of influence and power who are just kind of going along with this anti-trans sort of plot line. I mean, I'm all for having very important, detailed, difficult conversations about policy. How do you respect, the right of trans people to coexist in society, and girls who are on their swim team, like those sorts of things. Like you have to kind of figure out, fairness and safety. Like those things are important and are important to discuss. But when the side that's taking the, whoa, no, we just care about fairness in sports, when they're taking that side, but then they've gone and said that, well, yeah, we also oppose trans adults, and we also oppose allowing trans people to use restrooms. It becomes harder to take them seriously. But there's this thing with mainstream reporting a lot of the times that will just sort of take a very fresh, born yesterday approach to this topic, to be like, well, if someone tells us that they're just concerned about fairness in women's sports, then we have to take them at their word. And I don't think that that's the best approach here, because it allows them to get away with lying about things. It allows the anti-trans activists to keep pushing their agenda. I mean, if I wrote a piece a decade ago that was about raising a trans child is not child abuse, because right-wing people were saying this is child abuse. And it really is frustrating that a decade later I'm hearing people say, well, oh, this thing just sort of came out of nowhere and no one was talking about this 5 years ago. It's like, no, people were absolutely talking about this. It was just not being, you just sort of forgot about it. We gloss over these things. And 5 years from now, if, assuming that things don't just go horribly wrong, 5 years from now, we're going to have the same exact arguments. People are going to go, what about sports? And what about bathrooms? And I'm all for the NCAA or the International Olympic Committee coming up with their own sets of rules for what they think needs to happen in order for trans people to participate in sports. And they have. I mean, the fact that trans people have been allowed to participate in the Olympics for, I think it's like the past 5 or 6 Summer Olympics, and haven't won a single medal, should kind of tell you something. Should tell you that they seem to have it about right. But it's not actually about sports, and it's not actually about protecting the kids. They'll put these bans in place, and then those will be the same states where they're repealing child labor laws. None of it makes sense, but we all have to kind of, it seems like we're all sort of forced to play along with this media game where it's like, no, let's take them very seriously. Let's take these people at their word instead of questioning their entire career of lying to people,
Yeah. So what gives you hope, Parker, in this kind of bleak time? This has been a kind of a bleak conversation, but what keeps you going every day?
I think one thing that gives me hope is just the fact that I believe there are a lot of good people out there who do care about these issues and see them as issues of human rights and not issues of politics. And that happens, it's when we talk about politics and we talk about culture wars where we kind of can gloss over, that there are real lives at stake. And so I see young trans people online, fighting back against things that they don't like. And now that I'm a little older, I get to kind of sit on the sidelines and be like, you go guys, do your thing, So I think that seeing the resilience of a lot of younger trans people gives me hope, because a lot of times I feel like I'm being run down and ground down into nothing. But at the same time, I see others who are still putting up a good fight and fighting back and not letting our stories and our narratives and our lives being, kind of twisted and taken away from us. So the youth, the kids, the future, that's what gives me hope.
Yeah. I think the kids are pretty good. We've talked about the kids a lot on this podcast, and we're kind of I think the kids are doing a good job. So
not all kids, but some, most hopefully.
The kids are doing a better job than I think we did when we were kids. For sure. Parker Molloy, thank you so much for joining us, and come back again sometime. Hopefully we can have a little bit more upbeat conversation next time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.